Well, welcome everyone to this webinar put on by Show Me Hemp and One Voice for Ag. And today I have Megan Dixon with Show Me Hemp and myself, Bill Cook, and doing the webinar is Joe Cape. So we're going to be really excited about getting this started, but we want to give a little plug, Megan. This is provided by membership and opportunities, and of course, you know, we kind of embrace all of you out there that want to become members of Show Me Hemp and what we're doing. And Megan, you kind of just give a little what's happening in Show Me Hemp right now.
Sure. So we're just coming off of our first conference. We held it March 1st down in Jeff City. It was a great conference. We had a lot of good information, shared information and networking. And we have some new events coming up planned for the summer. Our next one is going to be May 5th with Show Me Seed and Flower in Brookfield, Missouri. All of our members get to attend for free. Non-members are welcome too, just for a nominal fee. And we hope to see more people there.
Well, thanks, Megan. And again, we appreciate anyone that wants to become a member. Be sure and call and talk to Megan and see how you can be involved. But this is brought to you by Show Me Hemp and One Voice for Ag. So, Joe Cape, I think we got some really good stuff to kick off. So would you just like to start sharing some of this really good information you've gathered in?
Sure, Bill. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to get on here. I practice law. I represent seed companies and agricultural enterprises and help them protect intellectual property and continue to operate. So I think what we wanted to talk about today was the implementation of USDA's final rule for domestic hemp production, and just to kind of lay out the framework here of where we're at currently. USDA published its final rule in January, I believe, of this year, which became effective on March 22nd. This rule, what it does is it implements the 2018 Farm Bill, which authorized a domestic hemp production program. Some folks may already know or already recall the 2000, it sort of expanded and really helped build on the momentum of the 2014 Farm Bill, and that was in 2014 there was a pilot hemp program established, allowed states and tribes to develop and implement pilot programs for hemp production that was all focused on research, agricultural research and academic research. So now we're in a place where we are at sort of full-scale commercialized hemp production. The final rule replaces the interim rule, which was in effect essentially for a year, and it made a number of really good changes for producers that are interested in growing hemp, producing hemp, handling hemp. That being said, we're sort of in a patchwork of regulation for hemp right now. This final rule sets out the baseline for hemp programs, whether it be a state or whether it be a tribe, and it also sets, in the absence of those, a federal program run by the USDA. They also still allow several states that are operating under the 2014 Farm Bill to keep that program in place. So you sort of have a patchwork right now. Some states who went through the effort of developing a pilot program are keeping it for this growing season, partly because they have legislative concerns. It takes time to implement new regulations. Some may have to pass legislation at their state level. And so some of those states have opted just to maintain their 2014 pilot program, and all of those require a research purpose. There are also several states that have gone ahead, developed their own new program and new system, and had those plans approved by USDA. So the easiest way to figure that out, USDA they have a chart on their website, says which states are and how they're operating. So whether they're operating under the pilot program or the new one. I know that hopefully that wasn't too confusing and muddled, but right now there is a somewhat muddled state of affairs in the business right now. That is going to end come January 1st, 2022.
Right.
The authorization for the pilot programs ends, and I think everything will now have to be in compliance with this final rule.
Yeah,
So,
and I think Missouri is still under the pilot program, if I'm correct. So
No, we've submitted.
you may be. I was looking at it earlier this morning. I don't recall right off the top of my head. I felt like maybe Missouri had an approved plan under the new final rule, but I'd have to look back at the chart. I went through all of them real quick, just to kind of get a feel for where things are at. I think there's only one state that has sort of opted just to use USDA's program, and that was Hawaii.
okay,
So,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
I guess what I wanted to try to touch on are, the final rule did some really good things for producers, and I just wanted to highlight some of those. One, and maybe the one that gets a lot of attention is, the negligent production of hemp standard. So, if you're going to produce, get a license and produce hemp, you're subject to, growing it in a non-negligent fashion. The idea behind that is, they don't want people, sort of basically wandering, too far down the THC level, producing, just planting something and it has too much THC in it. It's basically regarded as marijuana. So they really have they wanted to keep a lid on that, and they do that, with reference to this negligence standard. The final rule increased the safe harbor for the production of hemp that exceeds the authorized THC level. So the Farm Bill sets all hemp and defines hemp as cannabis with 0.3% THC or lower. You could, under the interim rule, go up to 0.5%, and that was okay. Beyond that, it would be automatically found negligent. This final rule has increased that to 1%. And so, in other words, in order to be able to market your hemp, it still has to meet the 0.3%. But if for some reason it goes over that level, you can get up to 1% and not be found automatically negligent. One thing I want to point out about the negligence as it applies to hemp production, it's not just the production of hot hemp, right? So you can be found negligent in other aspects of the program. For example, if you don't keep the correct records, if you don't provide land descriptions, there are three that are automatic. One is going over the 1%. One is not providing a land description. One is not having a license at all. Those are sort of the low thresholds.
Right.
You'll be automatically found negligent. That's a big deal. A lot of comments along the percentages of THC that would be allowed, and it was really a benefit to growers to be able to have the flexibility to go up to that 1% level. The other really key part that was unclear before was how many negligent violations you could potentially receive in a single growing season. For example, it wasn't very clear if you maybe didn't collect the right records, you had a hot hemp crop, and you didn't sample correctly. You could end up with 3 negligent violations in a single year. Or, for example, let's say you have multiple fields, and 10 fields, and 5 of which test hot, 5 of which don't. Do you receive 5 negligent violations in a single growing season? Final rule has made it very clear that the most that you can receive in one season is a single negligent finding. That's important because once you get, I think it was 3 negligent violations in a 5-year period, you will have your license revoked, and you'll be out of the business for the next 5 years. So it's a big deal.
Very serious.
Yeah, so that was a really nice clarification. The other, some of the other points that the final rule made was sampling was the subject of a lot of dispute, a lot of discussion, a lot of confusion. What parts of the plant to sample? Can you sample something besides just the flower? Can you sample, blend whole plants? What the final rule does do is it requires still sampling of flower material, but it has allowed states and tribes to develop some performance-based sampling methods. And in theory, at least, what that should do is require fewer physical samples. The examples that were provided in USDA's analysis and comments were that states would be able to develop performance-based rules that would consider whether a variety or a strain has a history of producing compliant hemp, under the 0.3%. The other was the grower's track record. Have they successfully produced compliant hemp in previous growing seasons? And then there was another example where USDA said, is the producer engaged in a research operation? Those things in theory, and you're going to have to check your state plan and talk to your state regulators to see exactly what they have developed in that regard, because it's left up to the states to develop those methods, and those are not the only ones. The idea, I think, is to give some flexibility at looking at these sampling techniques and what maybe the end uses of the hemp are, right? If it's for fiber, or if it's for a couple of interesting examples were microgreens and clones.
That's a good one,
right?
Yep.
So, but growers that are producing clones for resale, that material isn't going to reach a flower stage, or shouldn't be reaching a flower stage, yet the sampling regulations require you to take a sample of flower material. And so there's a little bit of tension there, and I think USDA provided some flexibility to address those issues based on end use and some performance metrics. Don't know what those would be necessarily unless you look at your particular state. Another big deal was a harvesting window. So the previous rule required you to harvest your crop within 15 days of collecting the sample. That produced an awful lot of bottlenecks there, and there was a lot of complaints about that, some, depending on weather, all sorts of situations could come up which would possibly prevent you from being able to get in and harvest your crop within 15 days of sampling. That's been increased up to 30 days, gives a lot of flexibility, or hopefully enough flexibility. They're not willing to go beyond the 30 days yet because, the pretty widely known at this point, the longer the crop grows to maturity, the higher the THC level goes. And so one point to make about that, you're still going to have to, even though you have a wider harvest window, you won't be able to market the crop until you get your test results back.
Right.
The one thing caught my mind was, there's a definition of lots in the rule, and for that could produce some adverse effects or maybe not. It depends on how you're running your operation, but the grower defines a lot, and they're sort of related to the locations where it's being grown. But it will also always be required to have a single variety in it. So the more varieties you have, the more sampling you'll have to do, and the more lots that you will end up, defining and collecting. You're not allowed to commingle lots. I think that probably could use some adjustment. Again, we're at that spot where we're really focused on what I think is hemp production for CBD uses, but it doesn't really recognize some of the other uses of hemp, fiber in particular. The inability to sort of do real sampling based on what your operation is, what your end use is still a little bit restrictive, I think. Final two things, I guess, that the interim rule did that really made a difference or will make a difference for growers. One is the option to remediate a hot hemp crop. Before this, if it became hot, you had no option. It had to be disposed of, and in particular, you had to go and find a reverse distributor in order to do that disposal. Now you have the option to remediate. In other words, if it tests hot, you can do two things, at least explicitly, and get it retested. One is take the flower material off the plant, keep all the remaining parts of the plant, the stems, the leaves, the seeds, get it retested, resampled, and then if it comes back at the 0.3% or lower, you're able to market that crop. The other one that they provided was blending the entire plant into a homogeneous biomass. Just take it, shred it all up into one sort of homogeneous lot, resample it, retest it. That's a big deal because an awful lot of folks had to destroy or lose their investment in a crop when it tested hot. So this gives them an opportunity to save that investment. It's really, really pretty important. One thing that I think really bears mentioning here is that the guidance that USDA put out on remediation, they indicated that remediation is any method that would turn the hemp, non-compliant hemp, into compliant hemp. So in the rule and in the definitions, they only give you two options. It's this removal of flower or shredding everything into biomass. I think there's going to be other options, and that's on the guidance document that USDA had. They don't give you any other examples. So I think it'd be really interesting, and I don't know what those could be, but there's an awful lot of folks out there trying an awful lot of things. So I suspect we'll find other methods of remediation. Let me see. The other, besides remediation, you have the disposal methods were fairly burdensome. Under the interim rule, it was you had to get this reverse distributor process. Hire somebody to come out that was DEA registered, and they had to take it, and it was kind of a costly process. Now you have the option to just basically do on-farm disposal, typical farming practices by burning, mulching, mowing. They gave several examples of disposal, and more importantly, you can do it on your own, and they've allowed or provided states with the flexibility of allowing growers to self-report. You can send that in a picture or a video or some other method so that it will, it does a lot of things. One, it allows you to kind of do it on your own timetable. Two, it's going to save you some money. Three, depending on what you're doing, maybe it will, increase the soil health if you're going to disc it in or mulch it or mow it or something like that. I think all the disposal methods would have to be something that renders the plants non-viable, but really a big deal. So a nice change there for for disposal options of non-compliant hemp. Those are the highlights, I guess, of the really good, sort of the good things that were brought about by the final rule. Some of the things that we didn't quite get to that probably are still burdensome is that we're still failing to recognize and implement rules, in particular sampling, licensing, testing, that reflect the different uses that hemp's being put to. And the easiest one to go to is always fiber hemp, right? Fiber is really, it doesn't make sense to go through this testing and sampling process for hemp that's grown for fiber. The plants just don't, the varieties that are grown for fiber are really, they're not producing a lot of flower material. It's just an entirely different process. And, fiber is, essentially a commodity. So that if you're producing fiber, it doesn't make a lot of economic sense to add all these regulatory burdens and the expense that comes along with them on fiber producers. It's going to put those guys at a disadvantage, against other fiber crops, cotton in particular. So that's kind of the easy one. There's a variety of other uses. If it was seed, for example, seed that's grown for food uses, human consumption. I think you've mentioned hemp hearts in the past.
Right.
So that's kind of the downside of where we're at, and where the final rule landed. It doesn't distinguish necessarily on those end uses, and hopefully we'll be able to get some traction in that regard. But those are the main highlights. I was just looking here. Yeah, those are the main highlights that you have under the final rule, and probably some of these things, not all of these things, are going to be applicable in every state. You will have to you'll have to look at your state plan and talk to your state regulators on the specifics. But I think you'll see a lot of state plans that are probably more flexible on some of these issues than the USDA.
Well, Joel, and before we get to all of our questions, of course, one of the things that we work with as one voice for ag, and through all of the different hemp associations and with the growers and the grower base, it looks to us like there's CBD, CBG, anything that's used as a human consumption product is one camp. If you're looking at grain, if you're looking at protein, you're looking at fiber, if you're looking at hemp hearts, if you're the thing that comes to our mind is the chicken industry, some of the other things that are going on, regenerative ag, where they're looking at carbon footprints. It makes a lot of sense to really look at the hemp plant as a way to solve a lot of issues environmentally. It also looks at a lot of opportunities, but that is the way we see that. It's just a commodity like corn or soybeans or wheat, and it is lumped in. And the biggest challenge is how to segregate that and not fall under the same stringent rules and costly licensing that you would if you were raising corn or soybeans. So it makes the commodity hemp at a very disadvantage, and it also people that are trying to growers are trying to reach out, get educated how to use it, find markets. It just depends on how their state is handling that. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is, the one voice, and with all the hemp players out there, is to kind of come with a message that this product fiber, this product hemp hearts, this product is a different animal and should be looked at differently. So under the final rule, we haven't really made that clear yet. This way I'm reading what you're sharing today.
No, you hit the nail on the head. We're the final rule doesn't necessarily distinguish amongst end uses of hemp, and some of that is constrained by what's in the Farm Bill itself. So the Farm Bill is the federal law that allows domestic hemp production, and it's fairly restrictive. It was passed with a certain understanding in mind. In particular, I think there was a lot of precaution around, we're going to allow hemp production, and you have to remember, hemp is cannabis, but with a certain THC level. So, in order to go ahead.
Well, we're getting questions coming in, so we want to answer those questions as they come. You have one question, Megan?
Sure. We have a member that messaged in. She'd like to know if you would please clarify the ruling about the negligence. A grower stated to me last week they were excited that the final rule changed from 0.3 to 1% for their hemp to be legal, which is not true.
Correct.
Please clarify.
Yeah. So in order for hemp to be marketable, it has to be 0.3% THC or lower. If you're over that, it is not. It's hot hemp, and it can't be marketed. The issue surrounding negligence is if you go over that 0.3% and you go over it too far, you will be found to be negligent in the production of hemp. If you're found negligent, you may lose your license if you're found negligent too many times in a row. There is a safe harbor, though, because hemp, it's subject to, the THC levels are influenced by a variety of things. Some of the genetics in the plant, some of it is environmental, some of it is how long it's allowed to grow to maturity. So if you're really focused in your operation, you want to be aiming towards that 0.3%, but they give you some leeway so that if your hemp comes out and it tests up to 1% THC, you're not going to be found negligent.
And is there a follow-up question? Okay.
I hope that answered. The question.
I hope so too. I think it does, because 1% doesn't mean you can now raise it at 1%. It just means you're not found liable, and it's just a honest environmental mistake or whatever. So, and it can be rectified.
Right.
But you can't sell the product that way.
Okay.
Yeah. Bottom line is
Yeah.
you can't sell it. You're just not going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have another question, Joel. Christopher Schwartz asks if a crop tests at 0.39 and then is harvested within 15 days, it'll be hot. Thus, I don't understand the testing timing regulation. Please clarify that.
If a crop tests at 0.39 and it has to be harvested within 15 days. So on the testing side, I don't want to get too far out of my swim lane, but on the testing side, there's some measurements of uncertainty, and there's some confidence levels that labs that are doing the testing have to meet. So if a crop tests within 0.3% within a certain range of uncertainty, right? And I'm probably butchering that particular term, but at the end of the day, it has to be the lab has to designate that this is 0.3% within 95% confidence level.
Okay.
So let me add to that a little bit, and what I hear a lot of our growers talk about, and then you can clarify on this. But for instance, if you have varieties, or if you have something that you may think, the longer you go, the more obvious it may go over that 3% or 0.3%, earlier testing may be part of the solution. So if you test your crop, because now the window of opportunity is now 30 days. So just as a business strategy, you might want to be thinking in terms of testing that crop at stages before even that harvest period, and using that 30-day window as an opportunity. Is that a valid point?
Yeah, it's a valid point. I guess it is. Remember that the sample has to be collected and sent off, and you have 30 days within which to harvest, okay? The earlier you collect the sample and send it off,
The better you are.
the better
Yeah.
the more likely it is going to not test hot. It'll be compliant. The later you go, the more likely it is the THC levels are going to increase. On the testing side, I think that question is probably best answered by the lab tech that's doing the testing. But I know that there are formulas in the rule, and they describe how and within what range the testing can be and still be considered compliant. And there's some sort of technical rules surrounding that the labs have to apply. In terms of the harvest window, you simply have to get it done within 30 days. If for some reason, I guess in theory it's possible, you collect a sample, and if you wait till the 30th day to get your harvest, maybe the THC level has gone up, but your test result is going to be the test result that you got on that sample when you sent it in. So,
yeah, but to answer the question, if it's 3.9, it's just over.
Yes and no. I don't know that I quite go that far, but I don't know that I'm able to 100% answer that question, because when I read through the rule, some of that I sort of glazed over. But there's discussion about the testing and how it's done. So there's two different primary testing methods. They will sometimes come back with different results. It could be a 0.33, a 0.37, and the discussion in the rule talks about if you get those test results and they're within this acceptable range, then it will be considered compliant, and that is guidance for the labs and guidance for how to interpret the result that you get from the lab.
So this grower that would come back with a 3.9, what's his option?
A 2.9. Oh,
3.9.
0.39.
How much?
0.39.
Yeah, 0.39.
Would
So-
it still
Well, he has
be
the option
considered
of having-
compliant?
You have the option of having it retested. You have the option of sending it to possibly a different lab. So you don't have to necessarily just get stuck with the hot hemp.
Right.
I wish I could answer that question better. I didn't really study up on those particular formulas. They are in there, and there's a fair amount of discussion about that sort of what the confidence level needs to be.
You got some input?
I'm not quite boned up on that.
Maybe you can share.
Okay, so he asked again to clarify, the 0.39 would still be considered compliant since it's counted to the 10th? Or if it
I think
tested at 0.39 within that 30-day window, that test came back at 0.39, would it be compliant?
I don't think so.
It just wouldn't be negligent. He wouldn't be found negligent.
You wouldn't be negligent, but I think Joel's answer was probably pretty well right on. You have the option to retest it. You have the option to go to a different lab. You have all those options, but if it's 0.39, it's 0.39.
Okay.
Am I missing something here, Joel?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. I guess what I'm not able to do, this is what I'm not able to do, is give you a concrete answer on that because uh, there is discussion in the rule about when you send the test to a lab and what the lab's results are, and those lab results are going to have a level of confidence in them, right? Every result, every test has a.
But we're
you
going.
know,
but-
we're fairly certain. We're 95% certain that this is correct and accurate within a range of uncertainty. And so there's a lot of discussion in the rule about exactly how you get to that result. I'm just not right.
Sure, but ultimately, what we're saying, he has to go back to a lab again.
Yes.
So
Sure. So we have a member that says Missouri has a range in our rule already, so he should probably be okay. And then the question that originally had come in from the viewer, he said that the test is either a 0.3 or a 0.4 without rounding. So I think his question is if it was 0.39, it's under, or it would still be considered in the
could
3%.
round down to 0.3. That's
I'm going to tell you
Okay.
the
It's non-compliant.
the rounding. So there's guidance in the rule on that. There certainly is, and the lab itself is also going to have its processes and procedures on how it applies those metrics, whether it rounds up or rounds down, and what that confidence interval is. But I can't tell you the answer.
it. Almost seems like you have to go
If
back to the
it's-
lab. I mean, to me.
Okay.
Or what? You got another question?
No other question. There was just some,
Rebuttal.
yeah. Since it came in at over the 0.30, it would be considered non-compliant in the state of Missouri.
I would, yeah. I mean, I guess the short answer is I would agree with that. If the state's testing regulations specify this is how it's tested, this is the way the results are interpreted, and this is how they have to be applied. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's back to our question about trying to get things a little clearer on a multi-state level.
Sure.
I think your answer is right that you're going to have one state may look at it a little different than the other.
Yeah, well, there were, if you look at the final rule, there's an awful lot of comments, all right? So
Right.
the USDA put in there all the different comments. Somewhat related to that is there's an awful lot of discussion around the idea of shouldn't we just be testing for delta 9 THC and not THCA, and or variations on that particular topic because what you're supposed to be testing for is total THC content, and that includes THCA. They have a formula for converting THCA results into total THC content. So there's a lot of detail surrounding what gets tested, what's included in the measurement, and a lot of people push back on, why do we include THCA? It's not delta 9 THC. It's and so fairly technical details. I think there's some differences in how the states have sort of approached those sort of particular problems on testing. There's a lot of discussion about testing and how it's done, and including which tests you actually use. There's the gas. I'm going to butcher that too. Gas chromatography, and there was another primary test. I just didn't get into the actual details of the
Testing side, yeah.
because it's kind of a lab. That's the domain of the lab and the technicians in the lab. But very good question nonetheless. I mean, those
What-
are those are issues that have to be sorted out on exactly how you test and some standardization around testing and the interpretation of the results so that there's certainty across the entire business, across the entire industry.
We have another comment or question?
Yeah, he was asking about if it was under the 0.3, and then a month later it was harvested and it was more than likely hot. What would happen to that material, and who would be responsible? And another viewer answered and said that it would probably be hot after that, 30 days, but the product was legal, as I think Joe had referenced earlier. That test that came in at 0.2 would go along with the product, and it would be compliant.
That's what I understand also. If it's later, it goes with the testing that you've done. And I think that's one reason why a lot of growers are looking at early testing, widening the window of harvest. I've heard some of our members talk about even pre-testing testing, so that you have some idea what your crop is doing. So I think those are just business practices that growers would probably look at that would be beneficial to them. And does that kind of pass the muster test? If it's tested, if it's 2, it doesn't make any difference. It gets hot later. It's that test right there. Is that correct?
That's your official.
Yeah, that's your official.
Your official sample. Sample is collected. The sample has to still be collected by a sampling agent. They collect it. They send it in. The lab tests it. That's going to be your official test result. So if in that 30-day period it goes over, and there's no requirement that you continue to test all the way through to harvest. It's just you have a 30-day window of opportunity to get out there, and you have to get it done by the 30th day.
So let me hypothetically, a grower tests and it's either close to hot or hot, and he's tested early. What keeps him from going to another lab and getting it retested himself, or retested if you're on that 2.9 to 3.1 span? Differential.
You have the right to get a retest if it is non-compliant.
As long as your retest is compliant, then you can disregard the other lab test and go with your test that's compliant.
Yeah. Besides that, though, you have some decisions to make now that you didn't have before. If you get your first test result and it's hot, and maybe it's just slightly hot, you have the decision to remediate now.
Right.
And that was, so, I think that you may want to really consider, between those two decisions, which route do you want to go? Would you rather just remediate? And I guess, and of course, a lot of that's going to depend on what the end use you intended for the crop
to be.
But I think depends on kind of on the economics. Are you going to go through the retesting procedure if it's cheaper to simply remediate and go that route?
Sure.
But
you can see where that really puts a lot of pressure on a fiber crop, or a crop that has nothing to do with a CBD or human consumption. It's something going to fiber, which relatively, what's the purpose of that function? I guess that's the point that I was trying to make earlier. For our growers to be, if they're raising for fiber, they're raising for hemp, they're raising for grain, or they're raising for seed, it just seems to be like there needs to be another set of rules that we follow under that, what I would call almost 2 different commodities.
I agree with you. Some of these are going to be worked out with some additional experience in growing season. The Farm Bill is getting ready to start, a new round of sort of negotiation and the crafting of a new farm bill. By the time we reach passage, right, there's likely to be 2 to 3 more growing seasons under our belt. And so there's going to be a pretty golden opportunity to address some of these issues specifically and maybe amend these hemp production provisions to address this. For example, a lot of people really want that 0.3% to be raised, period, to be legal at 1%. And when the new farm bill gets negotiated and crafted, there's the opportunity to get that done.
Right.
And so and of course, there's going to be a lot of experience. All of this, has to be reported in real time to USDA. So they're going to be collecting an awful lot of data, and that will be available to Congress when they go to passage. So I think some of these things could get worked out, not quickly. I mean, there's going to be 2 or 3 seasons to go, but I think it'll get worked out.
Well, and I think that kind of takes us towards the end of our webinar, where we as Show Me Hemp and One Voice for Ag are really working collectively together to try to get more education, not only to the consumer, but also to the folks that make those decisions. And one of the things that I did want to mention that, futuristic here, we think by the end of, before the end of summer, we will have collectively sponsored what we call the first hemp museum here, and we're going to start that process here in Missouri. So it's for an educational process, not only for consumers, but also for our state and federal politicians to look at, the real truth about cannabis versus hemp. And so I think it's our job as the association, Megan. And again, I would give a plug for looking at Show Me Hemp as a member or participating at some level, that we can get some of these things done, like the webinar today. Thank you, Joel. You did a great job. If we have any more ending questions before we close the webinar, we're sure welcome to take another question or two before we close. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up here pretty quick.
Yep, I think that's all the questions that we have. I'd like to thank everybody that watched, Joel, Bill, for being here. And if anybody would like to ask questions about Show Me Hemp, feel free to call the office, 816-318-7201. I'm here to help and support the hemp community and network and communicate.
And you'll show them how to become a member.
I will do that.
All right. Well, Joel, Kate, thank you. A great job. And thank you to our audience. And Megan, thanks for being a good supporter and making Show Me Hemp what it is today.
All right. Thanks all.
Thanks a lot, Bill and Megan.
Bye,
Thank
Joel.
you.
All right.